remember where I got to in this PowerPoint by any chance? It's third period. Did I talk about this guy? Edwin Shattuck, who did end utilitarianism, like redoing this sanitation systems in England and stuff like that.
Good morning,
I talked about
Mustangs,
that.
and welcome back. You should be reporting to your third period cohort right now. Again, all students.
I talked about the guy that widened the boulevards in Paris, George Haussmann. Are you guys regular world? This is AP Euro. Third period. No, it's third period. Yes, no problem. I'll see you for tomorrow, though. Okay. All right. Did I talk about this? George Haussmann widening the boulevards in Paris. I talked about that. Yeah. Okay. Did I talk about electric streetcars? Did that ring a bell? Kind of ish. Streetcars, mass transportation, electricity, subways. Any of this ringing a bell? Okay, we haven't watched for weeks. Who all's in here, by the way? I can't tell who you are. I have no idea who any of you are. Well, I think I know you. Seth? Yeah, you're Seth. I can tell. Even with the mask, I can tell. Who all do we have in here? What's your name? Joseph Curran. Every time we're from the office, yeah. So I'm not wearing a mask, and they can't make me. Well, they probably could if they told me if I am. But okay, very good. And then who do we have in the corner over there? Morgan. Morgan, how's it going? Wow, this is great. Rhea. Hannah Lozada? Nicole? Vanya. All right. Wow, it's nice to put some faces to the names. You know, that's fun. What do you guys think? What do you think about my classroom? Nice digs, huh? Right? I don't have anything up really. I used to have a bunch of flags and other things up. Too much work. All right. So, by the way, we are streaming right now. Let's see here. 2 viewers. Mr. Knight, am I supposed to be in here? Yes, you are. Very good. Well, I believe you guys all took a test recently, okay? Last Wednesday, is that right? Yep. How'd it go? You're just looking at me like, die. That's the look in your eyes. Good. Well, hopefully the test went okay for you. I haven't graded them. I haven't even looked at them yet, but I'm going to do that today after this class. And then, of course, this afternoon, we have the same 2 classes again, but, you know, different cohorts. So, yeah, what's up? Yeah, so I'm going to do one half of the class. I have 45 minutes with you right now. So I'm going to do a 45-minute lecture with you right now. And then in the afternoon time, I'll do different stuff with the kids who come here in the afternoon, having expected that they will have seen the one that I'm doing for you right now. Right? Because without that, here's the thing. Otherwise, I get 45 minutes a week with you to finish the rest of the school year. Yeah. Nicole, did I have you in a different class? That's what it was. I thought I recognized you. Okay, very good. I was like, I don't teach freshmen, so I don't know how I would have had you. Okay, cool, very good. All right. So, we're looking at 19th century Victorian era. Queen Victoria, named after Queen Victoria. This is a larger cohort in here. We've got 7 kids in here. Let's check out the attendance really quick before I forget to do that. Victorian era, named after Queen Victoria, who, until Elizabeth II, was the longest reigning queen in English history. So, Joseph, Morgan, Rhea, Seth, Hannah, Nicole, Vanya. You guys are like practically sitting in order in here. That's really weird. All right. So, okay. All right. That works good for me. And then we have until, you guys know how late this class goes? 45 minutes or something. Excellent. All right. Thank you for that. Is that Morgan? Thank you, Morgan. All right. So, I'm going to start here. Migration and emigration. We talked about people moving to cities, right, from the countryside, right? People moving to cities from the countryside. Significant migration to cities still continued to happen into the we're moving into the late 1800s here. And in some areas, agricultural challenges forced people to search for other opportunities. Social structure as a result of the Industrial Revolution and urbanization. So we're starting to see the gap between the rich and the poor continue to widen. It is not getting any smaller. This period of time became known as the golden age of the middle class because what we are seeing is, although the gap between the rich and the poor is not decreasing, we are seeing increasing numbers of people in the middle class. Who, when we say the middle class, you know, we use these phrases in Euro, like bourgeoisie, right? The bourgeoisie. Newsflash, kids. Look in a mirror, and you're looking at the bourgeoisie, okay? You are the bourgeoisie. You live in...
Good morning, teachers. Pardon the interruption. At this time, please do not release any more students to the cafeteria for BYOD. Thank you.
You guys live in Eastvale, okay? The bubble community. Free of any real problems, aside from, you know, the things that middle-class folk worry about, which is like, is Starbucks open today? Or things like, you know, that's the biggest worry. Did my neighbor water their plants? Or is their house going to make mine look bad now? You know, those are the sorts of worries that folks have, and I'm, of course, kind of joking with you. You can relax. But the idea being that people's troubles in Eastvale are a far cry from the people's troubles of wherever, Mumbai, India, or something, okay? Where there are far more people living in those kinds of conditions globally than there are in Eastvale-type communities globally. So that's something to keep in mind, because the number of people entering into the middle class, of course, increases the availability of goods, consumer goods that they're able to purchase, and the growing middle class lends itself to this era of consumptionism, consumerism, rather. Consumption, where people are going and, like, take, for example, one of the things that starts to develop during this time, professional sports teams, right? When you have extra money and extra time, because you're now part of the middle class, you can go and buy tickets to go and see Manchester United play soccer. or you can go into Arsenal or whoever you like, because we're talking about Britain here, so they probably watch football, soccer. But anyhow, the standard of living improves for these folks, and it's a funny thing because I could go on and on about the middle class. I'll spare you it, but wages and consumption increased 50% between 1820 and 1850, and it's only going to continue increasing more after that. We see new kinds of jobs that people are getting themselves into, professional kinds of jobs. Here I am. I wore a tie today for you guys because I thought, well, I'm coming to school, I better look halfway decent. Some days on the Zoom lectures, I've kind of let myself go a little bit. Wake up a little tired, feeling kind of rough in the morning time. But today I was like, okay, I'm coming in and actually working today. There is something to be said about showing up to the school. There's more of like I was ready to go today. But professionals, if you can call me a professional, you have people who have acute, specialized knowledge in certain things. And these kinds of jobs lend themselves to making more money because any old idiot can't do it. So, like, if you get a job as an engineer, obviously they're not going to hire you unless you have an appropriate education as an engineer, or if you have a college degree, or like anything. It doesn't matter what it is. You can't be a lawyer unless you went to law school and passed the bar. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things where you need to have accomplished certain things in order to get those kinds of jobs. These kinds of jobs are starting to emerge increasingly during this time because of all the new avenues. They say, even for you guys, this is weird, and it's true. So they say that for you guys that are going to be graduating upcoming here in the next couple of years, that the kinds of fields that you guys will get into eventually one day for work don't even exist yet, right? Like, technology is changing so quickly, and I want you to just think about this for a second. Like, Amazon's been around for a while now. It's been around for a while, but it was nowhere near as big as it was like 10, 12 years ago. 10, 12 years ago, Amazon, very, very few people used Amazon. It existed, but it was like just whatever. Now think about it. It's huge. And then, too, anything like that. Like, imagine, okay, so I graduated high school in 2002, a million years ago. Okay? 2002, there was no Facebook when I graduated high school. It didn't exist until the following year. 2003, I think Facebook came around. There was no Twitter. There was Google, but barely. I got introduced to Google my senior year of high school. Like, think about that for a second. And I'm only, 37? That's not that old. But that's in the last 20 years since I graduated. 19 years, for being technical. Think about how much the world has changed in just that amount of time. Now think about, from now, 19 years in the future from where we're at now. That's why they say that there's a very strong likelihood that as you guys enter into the workplace, you will find careers doing things that seriously don't even exist today, just like they didn't when I was a kid. So, anyhow, these kinds of jobs, people make more money doing them, right? And so it expands and diversifies the lower middle class. You start to have more independent property-owning shopkeepers. Small business people grew. You have increase in white-collar employees like salesmen, bookkeepers, store managers, clerks, who make a little bit more money than like a wage laborer. Middle-class diversity, about 15 to 20% of the population in Western Europe, less so in Eastern Europe. The middle class follows industrialization, so those places that industrialized first, the middle class grew there first. And then you also have this thing known as the Petite Bourgeoisie, or that's spelled wrong, but Petite Bourgeoisie. The Petite Bourgeoisie is like the lower middle class. So if we were to divide it up into tiers... Oh, I forgot I get to do this. check this out. Mr. Knight's more than incompetent with electronics. Laugh at me. Where's the Zoom? Zoom. Where did my other thing go? Now I've done it. So this is why I never trust any of this stuff. It's always just, I should have just stuck to what I know and picked up this dry erase marker and gone straight over the whiteboard. Or better yet, I should have used it on the thing so you guys thought I was nuts. Let's do this. Maybe this will work. No, I don't want to save it. Oh, lordy. All right, let's see what we can do here. No signal. Oh God. Why did I have to get, oh wait, there we go. Alright. I'm just gonna stick to what I know. Markers. So, if we're talking about like the division of the classes, like the way that you divide it up is right, you've got like your nobles up here, and then you've got your middle class, so to speak. And then within that, you've got like upper, kind of like middle, and then lower middle class. And this petite bourgeoisie is this right here. Bourgeois, and then beneath that you have like your working classes here, and even within the working classes you've got kind of like an upper working class, a middle working class, and a lower working class. Like, so these are just broad categories, like upper, middle, low working or lower. It's kind of like, that's why they don't say lower classes. It sounds mean, you know, but this petite bourgeoisie is going to encompass a lot of women in those kinds of positions, working as like low-level positions like telephone operators, for example, or you know, just stuff like that. So, fortunately, I'm really glad I got that back, because that would have been so sad if I didn't. This thing, even for me, troublesome. All right. Characteristics of the middle class. Most of them support classical liberalism, constitutional protections, things like that. They carry political influence through increased land ownership tied to voting rights at that time. There used to be a lot of property qualifications on voting. And individual liberty and respectability was based on economic success. Frugality and future planning was a big part of the middle class, so that they set themselves up for growth of future generations of wealth. The family was the foundation of the social order. You know, it's funny about that future planning and setting up future generations of wealth. I mean, it sounds really good, and there are, of course, people who benefit greatly from that. But anytime I think about anyone who was raised in a family with tremendous amounts of wealth, whether it was like Paris Hilton or the Kardashians or whoever, like they just have huge amounts of money from the time that they're very young. Trump even, I'll include him in there. Anyone who is a born billionaire, regardless of your political standings, it seems completely toxic. It seems like the worst possible way to raise a kid is in tons and tons and tons of wealth. I feel like it can only create dysfunction. So there's something to be said about like those billionaires who are like, I'm not giving my kids any money. I'm just going to give it all to charity. And you can like build your own fortune. Like, I kind of get it. Like, I don't know. I mean, if I was that kid, that would kind of be crappy. But at the same time, it's not my money either. I didn't earn it. I would just be getting the money that somebody else earned, and then that's not really very teaching you any life lessons. You know, that's my thoughts on it at least. But, so family was foundation for the social order, and this whole idea about building up wealth for the family, right? Generational wealth was like a strong idea that these middle-class folks emphasized. And, of course, they have strong feelings of nationalism as well. Working classes made up still about 80% of the population at this time. Many of them were peasants, hired hands, less unified and homogenous than in the middle classes. In other words, the middle classes are all pretty well similar to one another. The lower working classes are going to be a little bit less similar to one another. You have people at the very top of the working class. Over there, it's like the bottom bracket at the very top of it. You have like upper, lower class, if you will. And they are going to be your highly skilled workers, who constitute kind of what was known as this labor aristocracy. People who knew a lot about a particular field of work that they were in. Let's say they're in construction, or they're a foreman, or a skilled craftsman of some sort. These people are going to have a little bit more leverage in the working class because they're smart and they're skilled at a particular task. Then you have people who are in the middle, who are like semi-skilled. They know how to lay bricks or something like that, but they don't know about, construction companies and other things like that, how to manage workers and other stuff. And then you've got your unskilled workers and domestic servants, who are oftentimes women, at the very bottom of the social order, who are working in kind of just mindless factory type scenarios. It doesn't take a lot of skill at all to be successful working in a factory. All right, the changing family. So we're going to talk a little bit about, this is not the most exciting unit, kids, I got to be honest with you. I hate this stuff, but I got to get through it. So this is why I actually did it first, is because I'd rather talk about other stuff, but this part's not my favorite. This is all social history, dealing with like how people's lives were changing during the late 19th century. And so, to give you an example, right? Let's talk about like love, marriage, child rearing, things like that. So previously to the 19th century, the most common reason that people got married was because it was an economic benefit of some sort to their family. Like, oh, your family makes this amount of money, our family makes this amount of money, we each have a little plot of land, whatever, this is conducive for our families joining together in marriage, right? It's like almost like arranged marriages in a way back in the olden days. Increasingly, as we move throughout the 19th century into the era of industrialization, romantic love starts to become more important for marriage. Now, back in the Protestant Reformation, we talked about how Lutheran Protestant faiths emphasized loving relationships between man and wife and stuff like that. However, that alone wasn't enough to like get rid of the old way of doing things of like marriages happening as a result of mutually beneficial economic arrangements. And so as we move into the 19th century, after 1850 or by 1850, romantic love, people falling in love, having certain feelings for another person, was the more common reason that they would get married. And we also have people getting married at a younger age. A lot of times people mistakenly think of European history that back in the 15, 16, 1700s, people just got married at like 14, 15 years old. To be honest with you, not really. It happened, but mostly in noble families, like kings and stuff like that, because they wanted those marriages to happen to secure economic arrangements with other nations. But in your everyday peasant lives, people would frequently get married quite late, mid-20s, late 20s, in the like 15, 16, 1700s and so on. As people progress into the 19th century, the 1800s, due to the fact that people had more money, they were willing to get married younger. This raised standard of living that people had as a result of the Industrial Revolution led people to start marrying at like 18, 20 years old. But economic status was still more important for the middle class, and middle class females were very closely monitored by their parents. Chastity was paramount. Males were not monitored as much. And we see a decrease in illegitimate children born after 1850 because, here's the thing, back in these days, if you as a woman, if you got pregnant, the pressure from society, in the middle class society, would have been quite great on you, because unfortunately, they had old-timey views on people back in those days, and I'm trying to keep this as on the level as possible. But basically, back in those days, it was very common for women to be viewed as quote-unquote damaged goods if she had already had a child or she was widowed or something like that. And so if a woman was to get pregnant from the guy that she was seeing, the pressure on them to get married would have been significant. And so we see a decrease in illegitimate births because of the pressures to get married if a female gets pregnant. The other side of that, though, is that not everybody's in the middle class. And so the working classes, unfortunately, the women in lower classes would have to resort to things like prostitution in order to make ends meet. It was one of the fields that women could harness some degree of individual business agency when they were locked out of so many other options. And so, oddly enough, women working in brothels and other places like that ended up having a significant amount, comparative to other women of their time, of kind of business acumen, the ability to handle their own affairs and so on, but of course doing so at the expense of their health. And so it's a sad thing. Not everybody. You hope that, of course, women want to enter into avenues of other professions that aren't risky to both their psychological and physical health. But anyhow, as we move throughout the Industrial Revolution, the other thing that we start to see happen is more deliberate gender roles being created. So most of the work of wives was increasingly distinct from the work that men did. And this is another area in which this old school thing of the husband is the breadwinner who goes and goes to work every day and pulls in the income, and then mom's at home wearing an apron, vacuuming, making Kool-Aid for the kids when they come home from school, like the Leave It to Beaver family or whatever. Do you guys even know what that is? Probably not. Leave It to Beaver was an old school show from the 50s, okay? And it's like the traditional white American family from the 50s, okay? Does anyone, you guys are looking at me like I've lost my mind. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Of course you don't. You're not old like me. Okay, so there's back in this even before my time. I was born in the 80s. Okay, but like when I was a kid, they would show like syndicated TV shows, and Leave It to Beaver was one of these TV shows. Beaver was the kid in the show. He had an older brother, I forget his name. Anyway, it's a white American middle-class family. The dad wears like a business suit to work, a briefcase, like leaves. Hey, Billy, how are the kids? That sort of thing, you know, like walk out, walk down the street, drive to work or whatever. All right. Mom was at home wearing the apron, vacuuming, right, taking care of the kids. Distinct gender roles, right? Distinct gender roles. And what's interesting about TV and those kinds of programs like that, on one hand, they are reflective of society. On the other hand, they're also teaching society what to be. And so, like, when people watch shows like that, what becomes disturbing about it is, take, for example, all that nonsense with, like, the Kardashians. On one hand, it's reflective of our culture, watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians. On one hand, it's reflective. On the other hand, it is teaching people that that's how life ought to be, or this is how life is. And so people start to expect, like, I don't know what they do on that show, because frankly, I've never seen it. Waste of time. But I don't, you know, there's a lot of things that people see on TV, on the internet, in movies, and they expect, like, oh, well, that's just how life is. But it's an interesting kind of thing to talk about. But these separate spheres are teaching people about what the role of a man versus what the role of a woman is, and this starts to be developed long before television. Television just makes it worse in some sense. But like these separate spheres of where men and women were supposed to be, what they wore, what they looked like, what they spoke like, all of these sorts of things start to emerge in the mid-19th century. Middle-class women began to organize and resist their second-class status to their husbands, demanding higher education and professional employment, and the repeal of laws that denied women property ownership. Child rearing. There was a phrase that was coined during this era called "spare the rod, spoil the child." And what they're literally referring to there, spare the rod that you would otherwise use to beat your kids with and spoil them. Okay? Why do that? Because back in the olden days, let's say 1850, it was very commonplace for children to be viewed by adults as just smaller versions of adults. Okay? These days, kids, right, I don't know if any of you have like younger siblings, or maybe you have like nieces and nephews or something. Maybe you're too young for that, I don't know. But if you have younger or little cousins or whatever, like, kids are obviously not adults, okay? Kids are stupid. And they do dumb things sometimes, and they say funny things and whatever. I don't mean that all kids are stupid. I don't mean it like that. I mean they make mistakes is what I'm saying, right? Kids are bound to, like, make mistakes. That's what kids do, all right? And in the olden days, kids being viewed as, like, just adults but in smaller form were treated ruthlessly harshly, oftentimes with brutal physical punishment, and if they messed up, which is like, of course they're going to mess up, their kids, but the thing is that relationships between parents and children in the 1800s would be nothing that you recognize as either normal or functional in modern day society, okay? Because parents were so harsh with their kids. Very, very stern upbringing, very, very cold. Okay, that's the best way that I could describe it. Very cold. Okay, and no hugging, no, emotional talking or anything like that. No, very low on communication, very low on warmth, and And of course, you can imagine that being raised that way, since everybody was raised that way, the expectation then moves on as kids grow up, and it's like, well, this is the way that I was raised, and that's how I'm going to raise my kids too. And that's how everybody raised their kids. So it led to a very stern, cold, harsh society in many ways. And increasingly, as we move into the 19th century, spare the rod, spoil the child, we start to see more intimate, warm relationships between parents and kids, specifically mothers and their kids in the middle class. Because, if women in the middle class of the 19th century could have gotten away with having kids without ever getting pregnant, they would have done so. But the only way to have children is to become pregnant and then give birth to kids. But they really didn't want to do that. And they didn't want to be the one to raise their children, because women of the 19th century were oftentimes involved in like political activism, and maybe they had a job even in some sort of professional environment. They didn't want to be spending their time raising children because that was seen as peasant stuff, lower class stuff to do, right? And so in the olden days, what middle class women would do is they would hire wet nurses to raise their children for them, even breastfeed their own kids for them, because breastfeeding and other things like that were viewed as lower class, and they're of the middle class. They don't want to be associated with the lower class, so they leave those tasks for others. But also, just in terms of biology, things like that, raising your own child, those kinds of things, lead to a more intimate bond between the parent and the child. So middle-class women, because they're not even raising their own kids, frequently really didn't have much of a connection with their kids, right? There was very little love in parental connections. And so as we move past this point, now we're starting to see mothers increasingly starting to breastfeed their kids, and then form intimate connections with their kids and raise them themselves. Fewer children per family as well was another thing that led to this, because back in the olden days on the farm, a lot of people would have, a lot of families had 5, 10, 12 kids, who knows, a lot of kids, because you never knew if all of them were going to make it to adulthood. And that was the other side of it, is like you never wanted to get too close to your kids because they could die. Which would be horrible, but that sort of thing happened. And so increasingly after this, we start to see books published on child rearing about how to raise your children appropriately. Parents intent on improving economic and social standing of their children. What do you guys think about modern day parenting? What are your guys' thoughts? You guys grow up with parents. I mean, maybe you only know your own parents. You ever have those friends of yours? We had a friend, Brian, down the street. He was a bad kid. I was a good kid, but Brian was a bad kid. And you know how that is, right? Parents ever ask you, is he a good kid or a bad kid? Or is she a good kid or a bad kid? Anyway, I guess you're like, what are you even talking about anymore? What do you guys think about parents these days? You guys have any thoughts on it? Parents too permissive? Too strict? What do you think? So quiet. No one wants to talk. No thoughts whatsoever? You ever go to the Starbucks and it's like kids screaming? That's just Nolan. He's expressing himself. Okay? Not in my family, man. Boy, if I screamed anywhere, there was one person who could always scream louder. That was my dad, right? I'll give you something to scream about. He'd give the old clenched teeth thing. Didn't take much. Anyway, it's funny because these days, I think that, to be honest with you, if I'm doing an appraisal, I think parenting is a lot better these days, because people, hopefully, the key with parenting is communication, right? And you want to be able to communicate with your parents and talk to them and stuff like that. You just don't want you don't want to be friends with your parents, and you have those folks too, right? The people who are a little bit too friendly with their parents. My mom is my best friend. Yeah. Maybe. All right. So, any other questions on any of this stuff here? Let's talk about child rearing in working class families. Now, children, oftentimes in working class families, when you got to be about 12 or 14 years old, they send you off. Okay? And you'd go work somewhere else. You'd go work maybe you'd be a house servant in somebody in a richer family's house. Maybe you'd go and work on a farm somewhere. Maybe you'd go and work in a factory somewhere. So boys and girls went to work upon reaching adolescence, and this is a trend that carried into the 20th century, but young working class adolescents broke away from the family more easily when the emotional ties of the family became more oppressive. And so, the more it kind of started to become the thing where it was like the more oppressive the parents were, the more impetus there was for the kids to get out, okay? And it makes sense, obviously. It's like, if your parents were constantly harping on you all the time, it's like, it just drive me crazy. I got to get out of here, But now, in modern day times, what's so interesting, so it's not very common these days to find this to be the case, but in modern day times, pretty uncommon for a person to move out at like 17 or 18 and then never move back with their parents. Especially in Southern California, because first of all, it's like punitively expensive to live here, but beyond that, it's difficult to move out at 18 and one, afford it, but two, like never end up having to move back. You might be able to do it for a while if you're in like a roommate situation or whatever, but very uncommon for people to be able to just like leave their parents' house at 18 and never return and constantly live on their own. What do you guys think about that? You guys have older siblings living with you at home? Anyone? No? Yeah? Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon these days to see siblings maybe living with your parents until 23, 25, somewhere in those areas. Because it's super hard to move out and be able to support yourself. You can go away to college, but a lot of times even then you kind of go back and return to the nest sort of a thing. Okay, life in the fin de siècle, which is the end of the century. The Bell Epoch, which is from about 1895 to 1914, increased standard of living in all industrialized nations. They sometimes call it the Bell Epoch, the golden days after World War, or the good old days rather, after World War I. The good old days for who, though? Women? Not really. African Americans? No. Good old days for white, imperialistic males from Europe. Okay? Good old days for them, when they could go into places like Africa and take them over and, not have any questions asked. So is it really the good old days? Depends on who you ask, I think. But better living, definitely, for people who lived in Northern Europe, Britain, France, Germany. And people were gradually enjoying higher wages and lower food prices, and, of course, more leisure time and disposable income. The more money you have, the more you can spend it on things. And so we see increased consumption during this time. This is what I was talking about before. Soccer clubs grew significantly, rugby, car races, track and field events like the Olympics and stuff like that. Huge bicycle craze swept Europe in the 1890s. That's when bicycles really first came about. And then women increasingly participated in bicycling in sports clubs and gradually abandoned more restrictive clothing, wearing things like corsets and whalebone skirts of the previous era. Corsets being those things they used to have to it's like a torso wrap, okay, and it's like you pull the laces on it and it crushes like your rib cage. But it was a very common fashion item for women of the middle and upper classes to wear. They start abandoning those and wearing looser clothing and stuff. And then emerging sports culture. This is another interesting side of sports culture. Is like, now, don't get me wrong. Sports are fine. I have nothing wrong with sports. Playing sports, that is. Like, playing sports. I play hockey. or played hockey. I don't really play much anymore, but I played hockey, and I appreciate sports. But when we think about national sports teams, that's where I start to think it's a little goofy, because you've got these people, let's say whatever, New England Patriots or something, right? Well, let's say I'm a huge Patriots fan. I go to every game. You know, here's the thing. Not one person on that team knows you. They don't care. You could follow them. You could not follow them. They care about the people who are in that locker room with them, maybe some external people of the organization. But mostly, like, here's the thing about sports culture, is it mirrors the nationalistic growth of the late 19th century, which is really interesting, because if you think about sports teams being representative of local regions, it's a way for people to have subscribed to a social identity, the same way that nationalism is, right? We subscribe to a social identity of nationalism here in the United States by saying, I am American. I am American. I subscribe to a certain collective, idealized identity of what I believe American to mean. But if you really stop and ask yourself some questions here about what does it mean to be an American, I suspect that probably depending on who you asked in the United States, whether they were from Mississippi versus Minnesota versus Southern California versus wherever, New York, okay, that you're probably going to get some different answers there, right? Depending on who you ask. This notion of, if you will, Americanness is based on a collective group of subscribed ideals, some of which we may or may not have in common with one another. If we talk about sports, okay, sports culture, this mirrors that same nationalism, right? People want to feel like they are connected to other people in the area in which they live. They start becoming fans of a local sports team, and before long, the Buffalo Bills become your, part of your regular everyday identity. And but it is kind of silly when you stop and think about it. It's like, why do I cheer for this team? I don't know why I do. I guess I grew up cheering for them, right? Like, I could have just as easily grown up cheering for another team. You know what I mean? Like, but because I lived here, I'm a Vikings fan or whatever. Okay? Don't care about the Vikings. Don't really care about football at all, actually. The only thing I know anything about is hockey in terms of sports. But, I mean, even myself, I used to be a huge diehard Ducks fan. And then, I'm kind of like, they could win, they could lose. It's not going to change my life. I don't need the Ducks to understand who I am. Just my thoughts. Cafes and taverns enjoyed increased patronage in towns and cities. We're looking at places where people can congregate and go and spend time, right? Department stores. You guys ever heard of Sears before? Yeah? I can't believe it. You guys actually responded to me. Let's keep that trend going. You guys, most of the time it's just blank stare. Sometimes I feel like I'm still looking at as I look across the class here, I feel like I'm still looking at Zoom, where it's just boxes, It's kind of what it seems like. But anyhow, department stores, all right? So Sears and Roebuck was like a big department store, huge. Sears, this is a true story, Sears used to put out a catalog, huge catalog, every year. And you could buy, not kidding, a house from the Sears catalog, and it was like a do-it-yourself house, like a DIY project. Like, here's the house, and you can buy it. They still have these houses built in certain places. They're worth a fortune. They're worth a fortune. They're like over 100 years old. But Sears and Roebuck, JCPenney, all those kinds of stores started coming in right about this time, and people start going to department stores because they have different departments. It's like a catch-all. You can buy clothes, tools, whatever else you need. Is that it for me? All right, guys. Check back this afternoon. I'll have more for you. You guys are so quiet. Have fun in your other classes. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Have a good one. Yes, I am.
I was going to say, that's very good. Is it you lock your copy?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes, thank you so much. Have a good one.